in general, the technology was developed for brain metastases, is what we call them. So the Gamma Knife is an array of hundreds of radiation sources that are arranged so that all of the beams or all the energy from those sources is directed at a single point. And that allows us to, by manipulating where a patient is relative to those sources, in theory, we can treat any part of the patient's brain using that device and do it in a very accurate way. So the Gamma Knife actually uses older technology, including what's called a stereotactic head frame, which is used in neurosurgery. It was actually developed in neurosurgery to help position the patient and hold them still. And so the procedure for a Gamma Knife works such that a patient is put in the frame, imaging is then collected, usually an MRI, which is a type of imaging we can use to see the deposit or whatever it is that we're treating, okay? And on that MRI scan, you can see the frame that's external to the patient that you can visualize yourself, and you can also see the area that you're treating. So you understand the physical relationship in distance and space between the frame and whatever's being treated. The frame is then kept on the patient while you develop the treatment plan to deliver the necessary dose. The patient is then put inside the Gamma Knife, and a series of computer algorithms determines how long to expose the patient to each of those radiation sources. The whole procedure may take a few hours to complete. Typically, a patient's in the frame for about 4 to 5 hours. Typically, you would treat somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 patients a day, although there are some centers that have longer extended days and may treat 4 or 5 or 6 patients.
With your experience using the Gamma Knife, what limitations have you identified?
Well, there's a few things that sort of spring to mind. One of the issues with the Gamma Knife is that at least its original variant, its original iteration, required the use of a frame, and it's something, a frame, if you've never had one placed, which you probably haven't, right, involves basically numbing your scalp, putting you under general anesthesia, and then, there's no easy way to say this, using a torque wrench to basically put you firmly inside a metal cage so that you can't move relative to the frame. So the whole concept of the Gamma Knife relies on the fact that you are not going to move inside the frame, because if you do, then the treatment we're trying to give you is going to go to the wrong place, okay? And so one of the limitations of the Gamma Knife is the requirement to be in the frame in order for the whole procedure to work. Because of the way that the process is structured, you have to be in the frame first, and then the treatment plan is generated to treat you, and then the treatment's delivered. And the process of collecting the imaging, a typical MRI for this sort of technique takes about 90 minutes. The treatment planning takes about at least 90 minutes or up to about 2 hours, and there's a little bit of quality assurance stuff that has to be done. So there's at least going to be a several-hour gap between when you put the frame on and when you actually get the therapy. And then the therapy itself is also a bit long, so somewhere between 90 minutes and 2 hours for typical treatment. And so that's a fairly long period of time to be in the frame. So once the treatment is delivered, of course, we take the frame off. But you can imagine, being inside a metal frame for 6 hours is not something that a lot of people would be happy about.
Right.
But it's necessary for that sort of a procedure. Now, the newer iterations of the Gamma Knife do use masks instead of frames, and there's other ways to get around that. But the original iteration of the Gamma Knife uses the frame. That's one of its limitations. The other major limitation of the Gamma Knife is because of the way that it's built. It's this spherical array of radiation sources. And so there's not a lot of room physically inside all of those sources. You're really constrained on what part of the body you can put inside the machine to be at the focus point of all these sources, right? And so the Gamma Knife was really designed to treat the head. We've used this technology, this process of radiosurgery, this process of radiation treatment for other parts of the body. Well, it's difficult to get somebody's torso inside the Gamma Knife to do that sort of procedure elsewhere in the body. So we have other technologies that are a little bit more versatile that allow us to treat other parts of the body in the same way, but the Gamma Knife really can't. So timing, the length of the therapy, your access to other parts of the body, and then reliance on the frame. Those are the main limitations. Some of the benefits of the Gamma Knife, it is time tested, it has been around for decades, and it is a very, very accurate way to treat somebody. When you are treating somebody with Gamma Knife, you're always treating one lesion at a time. So one of the newest advances that we've made, which is now also going to be a limitation of the Gamma Knife, is the ability to treat multiple areas at exactly the same time. So using other technologies, we can treat 4 or 5 different areas in the brain simultaneously with just as much accuracy in about 30 minutes, as opposed to treating 5 or 6 areas, each of which might take an hour and a half to 2 hours, would take somebody an entire day with Gamma Knife. Does that make sense?
It does. With that being said, do you see the Gamma Knife becoming obsolete?
Great question. You know, I've been thinking that for a long time, and yet they're still here. So the Gamma Knife, because of its history, because of the fact that it's been around for so long, it has many units that exist around the country that are still very active. And so I don't know that that it's necessarily going to vanish, but as we develop some of these other technologies that are a little bit more versatile, I do see its role shrinking, and it has. So if you go back, if you look at the utilization of Gamma Knife going back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it's not quite as high today as the number of brain metastases we're treating, because we're using other technologies to treat them. Does that make sense?
It does. Does the Gamma Knife have to be licensed to a specific physician?
Great question. So there's radiation's fantastically complicated in order to figure out, who can do what when. So with Gamma Knife, it's actually physical radiation sources that are used to treat a patient. And so the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the NRC of the United States, has very specific rules about who's allowed to touch radiation sources, who's allowed to treat with radiation sources. And so every hospital, every medical group has a radioactive materials license. And in order to use radiation on a patient, you have to be listed on the license. So that's one barrier. You don't have that same sort of limitation with other technologies that we use to treat patients. We'll often use a linear accelerator, which is a way to turn electricity into radiation. The NRC isn't involved in that at all, which is sort of interesting. But for Gamma Knife, it is. And so you have to be licensed. You have to be on the license for the facility in order to use the Gamma Knife. That's number one. Number two, the vendor requires specific training for Gamma Knife, which is appropriate. It's a very unique software. It's a very unique device. So in order to understand how to properly care for a patient in the frame, how to position the frame in the machine, how to prepare the patient for treatment, these are all things that are unique to the device that are appropriate, that require special training. And so you do have to go through special training on the device in order to use it.
Great. Thank you so much for your information.
Sure. Happy to help.
Thank you.